So we're gonna start. I want to ask you what you did in that first hour of deliberations on Thursday, because I think that's the time everyone knows you're back there. What do you start with? What's the first thing you do?
So we went back there, and the court can only give you so much instructions without it being like swaying or persuasive. So they gave us our book. So the first thing we did is we were like, all right, who's going to be the foreman? And I was like, I hope it's not me. And everybody said it was me or another juror. And he was like, you can do it. And I said, okay, I'll do it.
So it wasn't like a formal vote or anything?
No, it was kind of, we didn't go to vote because everybody was pretty overwhelming with me or another gentleman. And the other gentleman was like, you can do it. You're young enough to do it. But it was, that happened. And then we did an initial poll. We were like, where are we at? Let's get a feeling out.
And was that a straightforward guilty, not guilty?
Yeah, we gave the option of murder one, murder two, not guilty. And we weren't even talking about the tampering yet. We're going to table the tampering. Let's get the big one out of the way. And let's get our thoughts and opinions out. So we took a vote, and it was 8-4. And the 4 not guilties, they weren't like, he's innocent, proclaiming his innocence. It was questions. It was, this didn't make sense to me in the stand, let's review it. So then what we did after that is we looked at our notepads, and I said, if there's any evidence you want to look at, let's get a list, because we had orders that if we wanted evidence, we had to write a note to the judge, put it in a sealed envelope, and have it delivered. So I think that first day was kind of feeling each other out and getting the information that we needed at hand.
Was there anything that you guys got into the room and said, oh, I've been waiting to get this off my chest? Or did you notice this? Because this is the first time you've been able to even talk about this.
Yeah, that's an interesting part that people really don't think about, because we're not supposed to talk about it. So when we have those breaks, whether the attorneys need to talk or we're sitting in the lunch, at lunch and we're meeting, we had to pass time with casual conversation, which is good because we really got to know each other, which made us want to know what we were thinking even more. And I think it was really interesting. And initially with the not guilties, a lot of people, it was interesting, like question raising, like, why are you thinking that way? Inquisitive almost. So that was interesting. But yeah, you're just kind of working through it and kind of feel each other out, and finally be able to talk about it was good.
What did you ask for in that initial hour?
We wanted all the surveillance. So we wanted to, because it was so hard to see in the courtroom. I think, some people, we couldn't look on Facebook or social media. So some of the videos that were taken, the public actually saw it a little bit better than we did. We were 30 feet, 35 feet
it's
away
like
from
being at an NFL game
Yeah.
versus watching it on TV.
Yeah, and watching it from the nosebleeds, and you're watching the game on the scoreboard instead of watching. So we wanted to make sure we could really see things. And that was one thing I wanted to make sure is we could hammer down the timeline, because that was with the lack of factual evidence, the circumstantial evidence, we wanted to hammer that timeline down.
I want to go back real quick to the notes, because I saw people started to take notes probably with the opening statements is when people I first saw with their notebooks. What were people writing? Are you writing, I want to remember this, or are you more like, I want to go back and look at this? What are you keeping track of in those notes?
I can't speak what other people wrote. What I wrote, I was writing my own thoughts as to, do I find this witness credible? I would describe the witness as far as how the prosecuting attorney would describe them. If they claimed they were, or the judge named them an expert witness, I made sure I made a big star of that. Any evidence that was used in their testimony or questioned about in their testimony, I would write about, and then I would take notes on what they said or from their side of things, so that way when I did get a chance to look at it, I could put myself in their shoes a little bit and kind of see what they were talking about. And then just important statements. I wrote a lot of quotes, things that were like, that's interesting, like, why would somebody say that? Whether it was them on the stand or if they were talking about an interaction they had during the investigation. So just things like that. So when I was looking at my notepad, I kind of remembered where my head was at in that moment, if I found it interesting.
So you requested the evidence on Thursday, and then Friday we come in and there's been an emergency.
Yeah.
Did you guys know what was going on?
No.
Or were you told about anything?
We were left completely in the dark because they have to, privacy reasons why, I'm sure of it. And, the court, I have to give a lot of credit. The amount of professionalism that they had about things they can and can't do, it was very good looking back at it, but when you're in the moment not wanting answers and not knowing what's going on, it was pretty frustrating. So we stayed there. I think we got dismissed at 11:45 that day. So you sit in the room for 3.5 hours And again, not deliberating. We couldn't deliberate. We're not allowed to deliberate without 12. So then again, you're passing the time. You're trying to figure out what's going on and keep your mind from going crazy. So, and then after we broke on Thursday, a lot of us had a lot of thoughts we wanted to share, and we couldn't share it. So I ran into another juror at Meyer afterwards, and he's like, "How you doing?" And I go, "Oh, I guess I got to wait 4 days to tell you. You know, like it's gonna eat me alive." So.
And so you had no knowledge that those alternates were called back and questioned about their coverage and whether they saw anything or talked about it.
No, I had no idea. My wife was really good about keeping me in the dark about a lot of things because she was on social media. But she had mentioned, she kind of freaked out, like, did somebody talk to their wife? I'm like, no. And she goes, oh, wait, I misread that. I'll tell you later. I'm like, okay. And then she told me, yeah, they were talking about the other jurors. Oh, okay, all right. So, yeah. And that was Friday, too. She thought that was what happened.
So would you say that from Thursday when you went home through Tuesday, do you and do you think others thought about a lot of the case during the weekend?
I would think
that extra day on Monday.
Absolutely. I think it's hard not to. I mean, we invested 5 weeks of our life and dedicated our life to this for 5 weeks. And then when you finally get to the point that you've been waiting for, to have that hiccup, that wait, it was hard. It was really hard. And, you know, and thank God the juror ended up being okay and it all worked out in the end and it was all good. But it was a lot. And it's almost like, oh my God, it's more time. We're spending more time waiting.
Now, you told me that you guys all really got along well. What were some of the points of disagreement among the jurors?
I think that there might have been a little bit of a miscommunication about what we truly meant by saying not guilty. And then once we really, I mean, you're locked in a room with these people. Once we really got down to it. And the other thing is, when you have an opinion and you want to defend that opinion, sometimes you want to be emotional. It's an emotional case. So we had to do a lot of times like, okay, things are getting a little testy here. Let's take a 5-minute break and you can, let's, you gotta text your kid, go text your kid. You gotta go to the bathroom, get a drink, do that. But then we were always really good about coming back together. I think that was key is we could table something when we needed to table it and then come back together and let cooler minds prevail.
And as the foreman, were you facilitating some of that, or what did your role end up being? I
was the one that had to request the evidence big time. I was the communicator. I think more than anything, I was more of a communicator between our room and the outside room. I did have to play teacher and had some things because it is hard when 12 people want something to say and they've been waiting so long to say it. And you got to let people talk and uninterrupted. So I did a lot of that. But at the end of the day, we're all adults. We did really well, and we all got our point across well.
So there was no one in that 4 that was really struggling to come to the guilty side?
I wouldn't say really struggling. We just really wanted to be sure. I thought a really good thing that the defense actually posted was that chart of what it means to get a guilty verdict. And we actually even brought that up to the prosecution and defense afterwards when we debriefed. And it really helped us because you have to understand, if you do have one reasonable doubt, even if you think the defendant did it, but you have a reasonable doubt, by law, you have to rule not guilty. And that's, I think a lot of people don't understand that. I never understood it until I was in that moment, because you have somebody's liberty and freedom at hand, as well as the justice of somebody's mom and grandmother and sister, and it's a lot of weight. You want to make sure you get it right because you really only get one shot to get it right.
Tell me about that jury visit. What did you think about that experience, and what did you note about that, and what were you looking for? I know sometimes I've seen in trials where the prosecutor will say, I want you to pay special attention to the distance between this point and this point, so I'm asking, what did you take in from that?
So we were given instructions. We could be guided by the Michigan State Trooper that led the tour. We could not talk. We could not ask questions. And they could not give us any direction. It was, we're taking you here, take it all in, and if you have questions, we'll reconvene.
So did they say, this is the spray barn?
Yes, they would say, here's the spray barn, this is building 7, like how they had it in the courtroom.
And what did you know, or what did you try to absorb with this visit?
Really kind of, one thing that took me away was the pictures in the courtroom did not do justice to the size of the property. I was really taken aback at how big it was. So when you hear people say like, oh, well, they're in this barn, wouldn't so-and-so hear you in that barn? When you look at a picture from overhead, it looks like they're close together. But when you realize that the old shop and the dry barn are actually really like 50 yards away, that's a long distance. So that made me kind of really rely on more. That's what made me think more surveillance video. But the other thing is looking how it's set up and where things are coming from and understanding how things were moved. I was really interested in the burn pit and how you could drive behind things and avoid certain cameras and such. The detective talked about the tracks coming in. I wanted to see, are those always there? Is that from constant use, or was that really from when he did drop the tank off?
What about where the JCP was parked?
Yeah, where was the JCP parked? One other thing that took me back is I didn't know that there were stairs and there was a 3-foot drop between the drive coming out of the dry barn and the new shop, because the whole time I'm wondering, why don't they just drive up this way? And then you get there and you don't see that from overhead. Oh, there's a drop. So it just gave you more of a perspective of how things were really laid out. And really, too, like how much time it would take to move things from the house to the spray barn and kind of make things, that he was found guilty of doing, how long it truly would take.
What piece of evidence do you think stood out to you the most when deciding the verdict?
Honestly, everybody came together on one thing, and it was the surveillance video. And we kind of don't know if we misinterpreted it, or if it was presented in a different light, but we thought that the welder was put back in the bucket of the JCB and taken back to the shop, and where, the defense said, well, it just pops up out of nowhere. We found that when we really watched that the cameras had a lag. So they wouldn't trigger right away. When they get motion, there would be a 2 to 3 second lag. So that's why it looked like things would pop up out of nowhere, because the camera was a little late getting to it. Once we realized that, we took into account what the defense said with the tilling in the background. And once we realized that tractor
Those
tilling,
two photos.
yeah, where they said there was something in the background tilling with the dust coming up, that was a different tractor. That made me, because that was really my hang up, was he can't be in two places at once. Let's make sure he's here or there.
When Mary Chartier
Yes.
said during her closing arguments,
Yes.
I want you to pay attention to this field.
Yep.
That stuck with you.
Absolutely.
As a possible reasonable doubt.
Absolutely, and it made me think, why wouldn't that be brought up the whole time? And is this something the defense held on to as good evidence? And we owe it to them to look into it. So we did, and we found it wasn't Dale. So then we looked, well, where else could he be? So then we looked at the east side of the spray barn, that really terrible camera angle with the silo and the tree. We zoomed in as much as we could right there, and we saw him walking back with the welder from the spray barn into the east side of the new shop. To me, that solidified the timeline, which got rid of all my doubts, and everybody else was like, oh yeah, that makes a lot more sense. This is how it all happened, because that was the question, is how did the welder get back? There's the welder getting back right there.
Did you guys ever, it was never fully explained, why don't we see Dee, in any of this video? Did you guys just resign that to he must have deleted video?
I didn't. I don't think he was very technologically sound. And I think, he did.
Because he did have the former son-in-law, get these trackers and things.
Absolutely. And he kept saying that Milestone app sucks, that it's a terrible service. And working on it in that jury room, it's not a good service. It was really tough to work with. So that, when he was accessing that app in the morning, I don't think he could delete. I think he wanted to.
So where's the video of him? Would there have been any video of him removing her from the house
No.
if he did it the way that they said that he did it, with the JCB back to the back door?
No, there's no camera angle of that. And I think that's something that was known and obviously used to the defendant's advantage.
So there were no other questions that you had about, I really wish that we could see this on camera, but we don't.
Yeah, as far as the camera goes, we kind of nailed it down with that, and we were satisfied with that. We looked into the jail call that was made, and really listened to Dale about how he said things and what he truly said. Again, we really couldn't hear everything in the courtroom. One of our jurors had her ear up to the speaker on her laptop and was interpreting for us. We were interested in why they showed the FBI's evidence where they amplified the audio when Detective Greca put the body cam in.
And now you may know that the judge decided not to give you the transcript of that audio.
Yeah. Which, again, it wasn't super deciding. It was interesting. What we got from it wasn't really anything for or against anybody. It was
Kind of
more.
a wash.
It was more just kind of like Detective Greca talking to Dale's son about, are things unlocked? Where are the animals at? And things like that. More than anything, it was clarifying.
Getting into Greca, did you look at it as he was a sinister, bad cop, or did you look at it as he created an opportunity for Dale Warner to dispose of his wife?
I think.
Did Dale take more advantage of him dropping the ball in certain areas, type of thing?
I think it was more, I hate to say, dumb luck for him, for the defendant. I think Greca, being from not being from Lenawee, but living in Lenawee County now, coming from a metropolitan area, a lot of people don't think those things can happen here. That that won't happen here. That type of those acts don't happen in our country town because we're a tight-knit community. But I think it rocked our community to the core, and it kind of made people realize like these things can happen. Mm-hmm. I think he didn't realize the weight of the situation until it was almost too late. And people make mistakes all the time. I mean, people, even at their job that they've been doing for years, people can make detrimental mistakes. So I don't think it was anything sinister. I just think it was, you kind of get caught up in the wash and you start drowning before you realize you're drowning, and now you're clawing to get out. And thank God the Michigan State Police did come in and did a fantastic job with the investigation, and obviously it led to a conviction. So
there was a stark difference between his testimony and Juror's testimony. But what did the jury think when Detective Greca got up on the stand and was asked about whether or not he wanted to be there? And he said, "I'm retired and I'm only making $1.50. And here you guys are giving up your lives, as you mentioned, for 5 weeks." Yeah. What was your opinion on him saying that?
I understand it's probably not, he probably didn't want to be there because he probably knows he's going to be put in a spotlight, and it is uncomfortable. But, being a teacher, I don't make a whole lot of money. You do it for the service of the community. And even when you retire, you still owe that service in some regard. And I really wish he didn't say that. I don't know if he truly meant it. I'm sure there was emotions involved, and I don't think there was a lot of love between the MSP and the Lenawee County Sheriff's Department. Mm-hmm. So there probably is a little bit of some pride there as well. Mm-hmm. But, it was unfortunate he said it, but, I don't hold that against him. I truly believe, like, humans make mistakes. You live and you learn, and hopefully, he's never in that situation again, and he learns from it,
Was there any testimony that really stuck with you throughout the deliberations?
Yeah, good testimony and bad testimony. That was really like, wow, that kind of questioned some things. Like, the big thing was that raised out very early on, that was answered through the trial, was the tracking device. How the employee said that the tracking device was on the business report, but it couldn't have been because it was purchased with a different credit card not associated with the business. So that right there is kind of like, you make a note of that, and you're like, that's not true, whether intentional or not. So we have to take everything said here and make sure we check and validate everything, because if that one thing's not true, we better make sure everything else lines up. Mm-hmm. I thought Detective Juror, both times he was on the stand, walking us through the investigation. I have a lot of respect for police officers, and it was kind of cool how he got us into the psychology of interrogating and interviewing a potential suspect, and how he talked about how
For example, letting them know that you're going to search to see what their behavior becomes.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Or answering or asking a question blanketed and surrounded by other questions that are meaningless to kind of take their guard down and make them answer before they can think of an answer, type of deal. So that was really good. Detective Singleton was phenomenal. I think too, he kind of brought a little lightheartedness that was needed in that point in the trial, because it was getting grim, it was getting dark. And he had a really good attitude about it, and that's a retired detective who is retired and living his own life, and still coming in and with passion, and that I really liked that. So like I said, Michigan State Police did a great job.
What about any of the experts stand out to you?
My dad was a welder. I'm not good with my hands, and he'll see this and laugh and say that's right. But that was really interesting to learn. The time that was big to the timeline. Reasons why the weld was messed up, and then when we looked inside the tank, we actually got to see the shrapnel when we did the site visits, where you could see it was actually cut with a grinding wheel. His was really good. I really liked the experts they had on the technology with the cell phones and the searches, because that was key too. And I also really appreciate the honesty they had of like, you can't tell when this was really searched, because that to me makes me build trust with that witness, because they're leaving it up to us. And that's, I don't ever want to feel like somebody's trying to make me think something, and that really, I like that. It was welcoming.
Interesting. So what questions did you send during the deliberations?
We kept asking for the heart rate data that was brought up in the cross-examination with Detective Juror.
A lot of people on Facebook were talking about that. I've seen the Apple Watch data mentioned in other trials. I thought this was brief, how they discussed it.
Yeah.
Could have used a little bit more explanation. So what were you guys wondering about that?
Well, being a PE teacher, that's right up my wheelhouse. And the thing that stuck with me is Dreyer said on the stand that his heart rate never got above 67 beats per minute. And that's resting heart rate.
Yeah.
So I really wanted that. And I asked for it twice and was denied twice. And then Judge Olsaver gave a very nice, clear explanation the second time. I was like, okay, now I get why we're not getting it.
So then how do you make that not be reasonable doubt then? If you believe all this and the timeline is all adding up, what do you tell yourself must have happened with the Apple Watch?
So I told myself, and I thought out loud, and I think other people agreed, was that it's not going to help either side because it's not here. So let's just discredit it, because it's not going to be for or against anything, because technology does have flaws. Like he could have taken it off for 10 minutes, 20 minutes. There's a lot of what ifs, and we're not there to solve the crime. We're there to evaluate the evidence handed to us as is and make a decision. So we were just like, okay, we're just not going to, as hard as it's going to be, we're going to forget about that unless it really comes down to we can't get anything solved. And like I said, once we really evaluated the surveillance footage, it nailed it home for us.
I had questions about that Apple Watch too. Like I wanted to know if someone takes it off, is there a lapse in the data? If, for example, if he would have put it on her, if she had been sleeping. So I did have questions about that too.
We actually had a juror who had an Apple Watch, and we played around with it a little bit. But again, it kind of showed like the inconsistencies while we were messing around with it. So it's like, okay, let's just scrap it.
Were there any other questions that you guys sent?
Just we wanted the testimonies to clarify things, because again, when you're taking notes, you're not getting everything, and we want to make sure what we all heard was true. Not really unfortunately, we came to a verdict before we even got them, so they didn't really play a part in our decision. But I do think they did, because there was a delay getting them. It forced us to think about other things and talk through things, and while we were waiting.
So tell me what that's like when you finally get to a verdict. Is this are you saying it's time to see if we're on the same page again, let's take another vote, or how does that come to happen?
We are all...
And when did it happen? When did you take this last poll?
So murder one wasn't a thought, just because we all agreed that it was really hard to prove premeditation. The defendant never knew his daughter wasn't going to be home that night. He and his wife fought often. Why would this fight be different than any other fight if divorce and selling the business were things that were often fought about? Why is tonight so different? So we truly think when we were talking that we don't know what happened inside. Something happened, somebody snapped, things happened, and now here we are with this case. So...
And we talked about this on the phone. Sometimes strangulation, because it takes so long, could maybe go along with premeditated, but you guys didn't know if that happened first or second to the blunt force trauma.
Yeah, Dr. Cho didn't give a definitive, true cause of death in the terms of a singular act. It could have been the strangulation, it could have been the blunt force trauma, or it could have been both. So when we're thinking about what really happened, if he really did get upset and angry, it was probably a very sloppy and violent act, and it could have been quick. You've seen him in the courtroom. He's a big guy. She's not very big. It wouldn't take much to knock a woman out or severely hurt a woman of her size.
And the defense really took a lot of time to say through various witnesses that he was calm.
Yep.
And so were you thinking that a calm person may have snapped
Absolutely.
versus planned it all out?
Absolutely. And then just, you got to take your own common sense and sometimes not your own personal experiences, but just how you feel certain ways. Like when you're constantly getting bombarded with text messages that would frustrate you, but then when you respond calmly, that's the other thing is like in the text messages, you could chart it up to him being a middle-aged man not knowing how to text. His text messages were never long. And if they were full of vulgarities, it was actually about a worker or a vendor, about screwing something up with the business. His responses were, whatever the motive were, they were pretty normal of a husband. When she was upset, she was upset. Like, she let him know she was upset. So you'd have to think if somebody who is so passive like that is with somebody who's the exact opposite, at what point do they have too much? And that's what we really think. With all the other problems they've had in their relationship, at what point is the breaking point?
Mm-hmm. So when do you guys take this last poll and get that all started?
Yeah.
And was that on Tuesday?
That was Tuesday. I think it was about 4:30 because we had to wait just under an hour to go into the courtroom. But it was when we saw the welder go into the new shop from the spray barn.
So does everyone say kind of like, oh,
Yeah.
okay, and then you say, or someone says, time for another vote?
Yes, actually, the frames was like, oh my God, and even the people who were voting guilty, oh my God, we've never seen this. Wow, this is crazy. Here it is, right here. And then I said, do we take a vote? And we all said, yep, murder 2. And then I said, do we need to vote on tampering? Nope, guilty. I filled out the paperwork, let the bailiff know, and then we waited for 50 minutes.
And just clarify why you didn't feel that you needed to go into tampering. We talked about this on the phone
Yeah,
too.
there
I
was
don't want anyone to think you just
we just blew it off.
Yeah.
No, we thought that if he truly did murder her, all the actions the moving the tank during the drone search, collecting all the welding material, obviously moving the body from the crime scene. I mean, that alone is tampering with evidence.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of substantial tampering with evidence. Evidence, and we really didn't think it was that hard to figure out. We really wanted to make sure he murdered her, because if he didn't murder her, it could also be charted up to him not knowing and just going about farm business, because that's what he tried to make it look like.
Mm-hmm.
So,
what was the atmosphere like in the jury room? Because this is such a serious case. Even some of the jurors who were chosen had some awareness of the case, though they said they could be impartial. So clearly you knew you were dealing with a big case and a serious case.
Yeah.
So what was the atmosphere like due to that?
we were very professional. That's like my biggest taking point from this is a lot of people from different backgrounds, different personalities, could all come together for something bigger than ourselves and get on the same page. Not necessarily same opinion, but the same page of order of business. And one thing we did talk about when we did have like a little bit of a stalemate on Tuesday, I asked the people with guilty verdicts, what point did you decide guilty? Like what evidence, what?
Mm-hmm.
And that was big because I feel like that validated a lot of their thoughts and it opened the not guilty's thoughts up to, oh, okay, that's a good point. Let's look into it. And we did.
So what was the answer to that question?
It was different for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people, it was, 2, 3, 4 weeks into the trial. It wasn't immediate. I really don't think anybody came to an immediate decision. Because it is a big decision to make, and they really hammered into us that you got to take into account everything, and you can't have a doubt. So I think we handled that really well. I was very pleased, and I was happy to work with the people that I worked with.
Mm-hmm. Good. And how did you guys pass the time? Because we know you spent hours. Sometimes there was business that had to be taken care of. We got started late, or we're in the courtroom and the attorneys and the judge are working on things, hashing out issues, and you guys are back there. So how did you pass the time not being able to talk about the case?
Some people would.
Did anybody bring cards? Or
We didn't bring cards. We talked about cards a lot. Another juror and I play Words with Friends together, so that was a big thing. We're just playing words and showing each other like, oh, look what I did. They have really good snacks for us in there, so a lot of us took it as a time to let's get a Coke and a bag of chips and debrief, and a lot of us just talked about our lives that, you know, you need a break from the case. So we took those times as breaks and just shooting the breeze.
What did they feed you for lunch?
So we only got fed lunch through the court twice, the field trip day and Tuesday. Every other time we were on our own. So
Everybody packed?
no,
Or you
so
go out?
I had Taco Bell quite a few bit. You know, I had enough time. I lived close enough. I would go home, let my dog out if I needed to, or if I needed to take a break from fast food, I would go get a PBJ or something. But
What was going through your mind when the verdict was actually read?
well, one was thank God we got to this point. I've been in the spotlight before and I've handled tough situations before, so I wasn't necessarily nervous about that. I was really nervous about the reaction. I thought that maybe some people were going to be disappointed that we didn't get murder one. I felt that obviously some people were disappointed we found him guilty at all, and I didn't know how the public's reaction was going to be because this was so big in the public, and there was a lot of anxiety about, man, how are they going to react to this? You know, if we did not come back with a not guilty, that was a big thought too. So, I just want to make sure too that the Bach kids sat front row every day, and you do your best not to look because you're not supposed, you're going to be as impartial, but you're human and there's emotions, and you look, and I just wanted to make sure that they had peace with it. I think that's the biggest thing, is that they found peace in knowing that there was some justice served for their mother. That was big.
Now that it's over, how are you feeling about the role that you played in this case?
Being a juror, I didn't think it was that big of a deal, and then I realized how big of a burden it is. It made me appreciate our society so much more. It made me so much more grateful to be an American. It made me feel better about our judicial system. It makes me want to tell people to take jury duty seriously. You owe it not only to your fellow citizens, you owe it to yourself, because God forbid you're ever wrongfully accused or tried for a crime. You want a jury. And I felt that was a big fear. The public has an opinion, but I felt like there was a public trial before there was a judicial trial, and that's not right. You can have an opinion, you can have thoughts, but we need to let things play out before we incriminate somebody.
If you had to explain the verdict to someone who had never watched the trial or didn't follow the trial, what would you say led you to this decision?
So what led us to that guilty verdict was that obviously he was the last one to be seen with her and the last one to see her alive. That's a big thing. There were some inconsistencies that came throughout the 3.5 years of his interviews that raised eyebrows and concerns. But it was the collaborative effort of 12 people bringing their viewpoints together and making a decision together, and really hammering down the timeline with the surveillance camera, and taking in all the other circumstantial evidence, and truly taking in their personal experiences as a human and explaining that to help other people. Like I said, we had a 23-year-old and we had people in their 60s. There's not a whole lot of common ground there, so we had to work to that, and that was good.
Amazing to see that it worked out.
Yeah.
Sometimes we find ourselves in situations, whether by luck or whatever, that change our lives.
Yeah.
And I could see this maybe being something that changes your life.
Oh yeah.
You're an educator and a coach, and it seems like you really are taking something from this.
Yeah, I am. I was honored to have the privilege to not only serve on the jury, but that those people chose me to be their foreman. My mom's like, "Oh my God, I'm so proud of you." I'm like, it wasn't my choice, but it was a big burden, and it makes me, again, I think when in my 20s, I was pretty quick to judgment on people's actions and decisions, and formulating my own opinion, and sometimes voicing that opinion early. This has made me become a much more patient thinker, a much more open-minded thinker, and a lot more appreciative of processes. I am a coach, and I'm always feel like I'm on a timeline, and that things need to get done right now. Right now, we're behind. It makes me think that, let's take a break. Let's think about things. Let's make sure we get it right, because the quickest way isn't the best way. And I think that is true with this case, because it took a long time to get to this point. But it ended up being the right way, and it took time, and people eventually did things the right way to get the right verdict.
And you were able to go home and sleep fine that night, knowing that you made that decision?
That was the best night's sleep I got in
Yeah.
5 weeks. I had 30 minutes. I had to, long story short, I didn't get home till 9 o'clock because of personal stuff with my wife. So we got home. She went to bed. I was exhausted, but I just need 30 minutes. And I sat on my couch in the dark, just breathing, like, oh my God, it's finally over. And I slept good, because that was one thing I talked about in the jury room is, once we send this verdict in, there's no going back, and you better have peace with it.
Interesting. I forgot to ask you about one more thing I want
Yeah.
to circle back to. We understand that there was a debrief, that the attorneys,
Yeah.
did both teams come and talk
Yes.
to you afterwards? And how did that go? What
It was
happened?
awesome. It was
Okay.
awesome.
What did you get to just free talk
Yep.
to each other? And
Yep, it was really good. I think it was good because you got to humanize the attorneys. We got to ask questions that we wanted to ask so bad that we couldn't ask, and we got some clarification on things.
did you meet with just the prosecution and just the defense, or everyone in one pot?
All in one. And it was kind of cool because they all got along, but when you're in the courtroom, you could tell there was some feistiness, there was some tension.
They
And
did get along very well for the most part
Yeah.
during the trial.
well, I think that speaks to their professionalism.
Yeah.
They were really good. And, they came in, we had a juror who had a very interesting dog t-shirts all the time. So we love your shirts.
Oh,
and,
yes, I know. who
Yeah,
that is,
yep.
Yep.
Which that was a big topic of conversation.
Yeah.
And it was good. We just got to talk questions, and we also got to ask, we know our prosecuting attorney and our assistant prosecuting attorney because we elected them and we're all the time. We knew nothing about the defense, and getting to know them and how they're big shots, and they did a good job. And that's not saying that I was rooting for them, but they did a very good job, and we told them that you're a very good attorney, and they appreciated it. And we just talked about certain aspects of the case, and they explained it from their side, and some of the processes of the court that we don't know because we're not attorneys. So they kind of explained some of those things, and then really just shooting the breeze a little bit. I think we all needed to debrief.
I thought maybe they would ask you, what could we have done better, or...
They did.
Uh-huh.
I don't think they asked us what they could have done better. The defense wanted to know what made our decision. And Mary Chartier, when I told her the killing thing, she was kind of like, "Yep, okay, that makes sense." And I think she wanted us to look at that. That was her whole aspect. I don't know if she knew it were true or not, but I think that she needed that to know that doing that in her closing arguments did spark a thought. And we did check that box, and I think that gave her peace of mind too,
Yes.
knowing, they did go through all the reasonable doubts.
And I think it would give anyone peace of mind, the amount of time that you took. I think some people think, oh, it's such an easy decision, let's get this, it should be done in an hour. But I don't think anyone would really feel comfortable about that if it was them sitting in that chair, or if it was their parent who had been
Absolutely.
killed, or anything like that.
You also have to understand that there's 12 people that all deserve the right to speak their mind. And this case took 5 weeks, so speaking your mind is probably going to take about 10 minutes. That's 2 hours right there of just people telling their side of the story, or their side of their interpretation of what was presented. So there's 2 hours. Then we had Friday, nothing happened. And then Tuesday, we kind of had to trace back, reconvene, and then go forward before we can get there. So, and you just, again, it's such a heavy decision. You got to make sure you check all your boxes, because if we didn't check all of our boxes, and he does appeal and that does get brought up, our again, kind of speaking to the investigation, not doing our job on our end could lead to somebody potentially being free that shouldn't be free.
Well, thank you for your service and coming and talking
Yeah,
to us.
of course.
It was super interesting.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks.
Yeah.
All right. This was great.